Hey everyone, it's Simi Shaw, and welcome to Trailblazers. On this podcast, I dive deep into the journeys of trailblazing South Asians, sharing the stories of the leaders and dreamers lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. For the Trailblazers season finale, I am thrilled to welcome Sunayna Tuteja, Chief Innovation Officer for the Federal Reserve System. Prior to joining the Fed in February of 2021, Sunayna served as Global Head of Emerging Tech and Strategic Partnerships at TD Ameritrade. She also spent a number of years building out their crypto and blockchain practices. And prior to TD Ameritrade, she was at TD, leading digital transformation across the globe. She brings 10 years of experience leading change and innovation at the nexus of finance, technology, and policy. And she spent a number of years in banking and the VC and tech ecosystem, both in North America and Asia. Sunayna is such a firecracker, and I am so excited to welcome her to the podcast today. Thank you for joining me, Sunayna.
Thank you, Simi. It's great to be here. And congrats on the success of this pod, which I've become an avid listener for. So delighted to now hopefully be a contributor.
I appreciate that a ton. That means a lot. So I want to start with your role as Chief Innovation Officer of the Fed because it's the first of its kind. You've been in the role since February. Can you share a little bit about what your day-to-day looks like?
Yeah, so I've completed my first 180-day adventure at the Fed, and I'm still here as an industry person in this new arena. As you kind of read my bio, which, by the way, I didn't write it, and I always cringe when somebody's reading it. But yes, I have spent the last 10 years of my career leading change and innovation. And one thing I will say, as trite as it sounds, is the only constant of your day is change and your ability to adapt to that change, right? I think that probably is true of many jobs these days, or the way we're living our lives over the last 2-year simulation that we've been in. But I think definitely in roles where your mandate is really to be taking a blank piece of paper, something that's ambiguous, and people don't even know what it is that they want you to do, but they want you to do something, and take that blank piece of paper and turn it into a flight-borne airplane. So you kind of figuring it out as you go. And frankly, that was one of the things that really attracted me about this role. And maybe I'm a masochist for it, is they were like, listen, we're creating this role. We've never had this in our 100-year history. This is what we think we want it to be. But part of this is that you got to figure out what your role is, which I was like, all right, hey, okay, there's no bar to meet. I can't screw it up because there's nobody to compare to. So I would say my first 100 days at the Federal Reserve System, especially having come from the industry, and I came at it with a lot of exhilaration for the role, but also with a deep sense of humility, recognizing that I was joining, like I said, a 100-year-old august institution with a very important mission and mandate, right? So I really spent the first 100 days, Simi, suppressing my bias for action and really listening and learning from a diversity of perspectives across the system. Because the other unique part of this role is I'm not tethered to an individual reserve bank or a product area. And the mandate really is to think about the franchise. So if you're going to serve the franchise, you really have to take the time to listen and learn and understand the diversity of perspectives. And after the 100 days, then based on those learnings and listening sessions, I put out my 100-day readout of what I had heard, what our opportunities were, and what were some of the things we were already doing great that we could amplify, and put forward my OKRs, or objectives and key results, kind of bringing a little bit of our Silicon Valley muscle memory.
Yes.
And then, once that was syndicated and got agreement that this is the path forward, as really we're building this new startup within the institution, I've been focused on really hiring the talent to help execute on those OKRs, and then really starting to put those wins on the board. Because, strategy and vision and ideas are great, but until you can start turning it into tangible wins, there's just ideas. So that's really been the essence of the first 6 months.
Yeah. Well, it sounds super interesting, and you sound super fired up, which I absolutely love. You touched on the fact that you're the first to hold this role, which means that you have a lot of room to dream. But I'm curious, what have been the challenges of stepping into a role where you don't have a predecessor?
In the many assignments I've had in my decade-long career thus far, the weird thing is I think maybe the first 2 were the only ones where I've stepped into roles that were pre-existing. Pretty much my entire career has been a confluence of roles I've stepped into, and I was kind of the first one to be in those roles. So
Wow.
I now like it because, again, you get to set the bar and you have a lot of creative freedom in terms of what you want this role to be. And even as I built up my teams in the past, and I'm building up my teams now, I tell the candidates, this is a job description, the tenets of what we need to hit the ground running. But I'm also looking for talented people who then are willing to go big, go bold, and make the job whatever they want it to be. So that's been my mental model in all my previous assignments and how I'm embarking on this. I relish that ambiguity and turning it into something tangible. Now, don't get me wrong. There are days where I'm like, can somebody just tell me black and white what needs to be done?
Yeah.
I'm a pilot, so the analogy I use is it's like flying your plane while you're building your plane, which sounds like a fun adventure, but there are moments where you're like, no, somebody should tell me. So it's that fun balance.
I love the analogy of flying a plane while you're building it, and I imagine it's a lot tougher than it looks. When you joined in February, the Fed issued a press release stating that your mandate was essentially to identify and advocate for new technologies within the system. With respect to the technology, where do you think our institutions have traditionally been lagging behind? What's the first major issue you're looking to tackle?
So even looking a little bit more macro beyond the Fed, oftentimes innovation and transformation is tethered to technology, and rightly so, because technology is the enabler or the accelerator of that change. But that can also be a detriment. And what I mean by that is it can give innovation a bad rap sometimes because it can come across as, a bunch of people running science experiments or shiny object syndrome. Everybody who wants to come to Silicon Valley, it's like innovation petting zoo. So you really have to balance the notion of you want to be sensing and scanning and leaning into these frontier technologies, but you also have to manage it in a disciplined, credible manner. So the anchoring heuristic for me in terms of meaningful innovation really is threefold. One, what is the gnarly problem we're trying to solve? Let's start with the problem statement. And the gnarlier the problem, the better, right? I like to borrow from that. I think it was a Jeff Bezos quote when he was building Amazon. It's like your competitor's margin is my opportunity. So I think for innovators, where you see friction and experience, friction and process, that's our opportunity for disruption, right? That's what I mean by let's start with a problem statement. And guess what? We're in a targeted environment, whether it's at the Fed or just in any industry and category, as we're going through massive amounts of disruptions, that there's so many problems that need to be solved. There's so much leveling up that needs to be done, right? So starting with that. The second thing I think about is when we identify those problems, are we really attacking those problems and solving for those problems and shipping those solutions in a way that's guided by the voice of the customer? Are we intently listening to what the end users, the customers are telling us and using that to kind of shape the solution? And then the solution could be done via DLT and blockchain, which is super sexy. Or it could be, hey, all we need is a souped up Excel spreadsheet, right? Or a database, right? So kind of what is the customer saying, right? What are their desire? What are they looking for? What problems are they talking about? And then the third thing I think a lot about when we advance innovation is how are we helping to future-proof the value proposition of the institution? Okay. And I would submit that whatever size institution you are, public, private, small, mid, mammoth, whatever category, we all have to keep earning the right to serve our constituents.
Keep existing,
right? And that applies to the Fed. And just because we have had this amazing mandate and we've delivered on it and we've proven our relevancy doesn't guarantee that for the next decade or the next 100 years. We have to earn the right to serve our constituents, right? So when you put that anchoring heuristic together, which is it's problems first, guided by the voice of the customer, and then in solving it, are we also helping to future-proof our business? That litmus test really starts to turn those 99 shiny objects you want to chase in the moment down to, these are the three things we have to myopically focus on and put all of our rigor and resources towards so we can actually materialize it into meaningful value. So that's really the journey that we're embarking on.
Super, super fascinating. I think especially as the conversation has grown around things like crypto and The conversation around the SEC and other government institutions and whether they're adequately equipped to even tackle and opine and issue policy around this. The fact that someone like you is considering how do we earn the right to not be obsolete from the perspective of the customer is super, super fascinating. And honestly, for me personally, restores a lot of faith in these institutions.
I will give credit to a lot of my existing colleagues at the Fed who frankly have been on this journey. And one of the things I state very clearly internally and externally is decentralized innovation within the Federal Reserve System is fertile. And I consider myself one node in this network. Now, the privilege and the luxury I have is I get to obsess about this 24/7 and annoy everybody about to make sure they never forget about innovation, right? So it's really taking the work that's been happening and really kind of being the tailwind so we can accelerate our progress.
Yeah. So one big question I have for you is obviously you've had this amazing career over the greater part of a decade, but how do you actually get tapped for a role that's never existed?
Oh, I don't know if I've shared this publicly, so you might be hearing this first in your audience. So full transparency, working at the Federal Reserve as a chief innovation officer was not on my 2021 bingo card. I was just merely doing what I was doing, being the industry insouciant. And when I first was approached for this, Simi, to be honest, I spent the first 5 minutes thinking that this executive recruiter was actually somebody that was pulling a prank on me, and maybe it was one of my Bitcoin or crypto friends that had set this up. Because I was like, the Fed's going to want me, right? So literally for 5 minutes, I would not believe this wonderful lady who was trying to convince me that she was an executive recruiter. And I was like, who put you up to this? Did this person put you up to this? And finally she's like, you can Google me. Nobody put me up to this. So that just tells you how this started.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, what does the Fed need an innovation officer for? I've worked in finance and capital markets, and I know you have, and you said monetary policy. And when you work in finance, everything revolves around those FOMC minutes, right? And then you're a regulator and you manage the payment rails. And frankly, I was like, wait, innovation, central banking, isn't that an oxymoron?
Wow.
And then the third thing, I was like, okay, but why do you want me? I've been the industry troublemaker for the last few years. When you are commercializing new technologies in financial services and driving change, that policy component of that trifecta, that nexus of finance, tech, and policy is really important because, again, you don't have a playbook. So you're writing the playbook as you're executing the playbook.
Go along. Yep.
And I learned early on that you actually want to bring along your BFFs and legal and compliance and risk and regulatory affairs from day one, right? Because that's how you get to yes, that's how you get to the art of the possible. So I had been engaged with the regulatory community for years as we had been commercializing AI and machine learning and obviously crypto. So I was like, I am the industry insouciant. Why would they want me? Now, the good news is I have, for better or for worse, a very strong curiosity DNA, I guess. So in this case, my curiosity far exceeded my skepticism. And the more conversations I had about it, the more I learned about this assignment. And I think two things. One, that this was the inaugural role. And so you got to come and do and ship wins, but also kind of set the precedence of what a role like this could be was alluring. But I would say the other thing really was around just how strong and how mission-oriented the Federal Reserve System is. And I tell my Fed colleagues, now don't take that for granted. Not every organization has such a strong DNA of pride and mission and the work they do in serving the U.S. economy and consumers. And I'm a sucker for that. I need to know that I'm doing something fulfilling and making a meaningful dent. And it was very much connected to all the work I've done around innovation and transformation, which is how do we break down these barriers that continue to keep people out of the Big Ten? How do we minimize opacity and complexity in financial services and maximize accessibility and empowerment for Main Street consumers? So all of those things together, I was like, yeah, this is it. So into the rabbit hole I leapt.
That's absolutely phenomenal and so exciting. And I think it's hilarious that you were just in complete disbelief for the initial part of the process. So you just alluded to the fact that you consider yourself an industry troublemaker, and you've spent the better part of your career at TD and TD Ameritrade in roles focused on digital transformation, digital assets, crypto, blockchain. How did you find your way into this field?
Oh, okay. Another cheeky story. So I first heard about this Bitcoin thing in late 2011, actually at a Christmas party. Clearly, I need to go to a better Christmas party. So it was a work holiday party when I was working in iBanking or commercial banking or something. And a bunch of people were talking about this Bitcoin thing. I didn't know anything about it, Simi. I was just curious. And again, curiosity, because that annoying thing that I learned as a kid of asking why, now kind of transcends into my work, for better or for worse.
I love it.
And I didn't know anything. I couldn't contribute to the conversation, but there was just something about it. And then I remember going home that night. It was a Friday night after the event and just kind of saying, what is Bitcoin? And this is 2011. We didn't have the Cambrian explosion of content like we do today. The podcasts and the newsletters and the crypto Twitter, like that didn't exist.
You took crypto Twitter like out of my mouth.
Yeah. So the white paper came up, obviously, and I read the white paper. And again, full transparency, like I think maybe 20% of the white paper made sense to me. I'm not one of those people that read it and instantly the angel started singing and I was like, this is it. I'm a Bitcoin maxi now. No, I was like, okay, this is cool. And then I was kind of pretty much Googling every other phrase or word because I was like, I don't know what this is. All I know, it was like Saturday morning and I had now spent God knows how many hours going down my proverbial crypto rabbit hole.
Wow.
And I just got super curious. And then I started looking for ways to learn about it. I would find like meetups that I would show up. Now, remember, I was working in like very traditional, not just traditional finance, but like the most traditional part of traditional finance, as you know, investment banking, commercial banking, and secretly going to like these Bitcoin meetups. And I was like, I can't really tell the Bitcoiners what I do for my day job. And I can't tell people in my day job that I'm obsessed with this thing called the Bitcoin. And then the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. I think that's one of the things I tell people, agnostic of how they feel about crypto digital assets, is if you are insatiably curious, there really is no better place to be because this space is just coming up the curve. So you're getting it on the ground floor. And second, this is like one of the most multidisciplinary arenas, right? I've done a lot of work in AI and machine learning that's very technology driven. With crypto, you have aspects of technology, economics, social policy, engineering, cybersecurity. There's so much to learn that you're always a student. And I just think that's an awesome place to be.
Wow. There's such a distrust of crypto and blockchain and that whole universe, particularly, I think, in the realm of people in traditional finance. What made you really buy in? Was there like an inciting moment or something you read or something that just really gave you a lot of conviction in this world and these products?
Yeah, so for me personally, where it really kind of started to make a dent for me is as I started to understand some of the properties, and Bitcoin was the OG, right? Then everything else came.
Yeah.
But I think around censorship resistance, the value of the code. Now, the thing I will say about Bitcoin is, in a way, it's like our generation's Rorschach test, because we all see in it what we want it to be. And we all have a very strong argument and thesis for why it's a payment rail, why it's a hedge against inflation, why it's digital gold, why it's, uncorrelated asset. So we ascribe all of these dreams and aspirations to the single asset. And over the course of the 13 years, certain things have manifested and certain things haven't. I think for me, I come from a family of immigrants, and I'm an immigrant myself to the US. The notion of censorship resistance. I remember hearing stories of my family being displaced during the partition, and literally family members talking about how overnight they had to make a decision about leaving their home and everything they own. And my great-grandmother saying, I put on every piece of gold jewelry I had, the clothes on our backs, and everything was left behind. And I often thought, what if they had Bitcoin, right? Or some digital asset or some way of digitizing property. So again, your place shoots and ladder, you're back to the bottom, right? And I think a lot of immigrants can relate to it in many other ways. So, that was one of the things, and that connected to something that was in my family history. But I think the other thing, the notion of financial inclusion is a big one for me. Again, daughter of first generation immigrants. My parents are small business owners. I remember Simi going to the bank with my dad when he used to go make his deposits. And I always was curious. And once I asked him, because something about the imbalance of power bothered me. And what I mean by that is I was like, Dad, you're the one who works like 1,000 hours a week. It's your money. Why do we need permission for this person to tell us what we can or can't do with our money? The complexity, the opacity. And again, listen, the North American financial system is one of the best, right? And yet it still keeps a lot of people out. Now you take the macro view of the world where that access isn't there.
Much more limited.
Right.
Yeah.
So how can these new technologies help leveling the playing field? Now, I will also be the first to say that this is not a panacea. And I used to say this in startups that I would meet with when we were looking at DeFi, is stop with the DeFi is automatically going to solve all the financial inclusion problems. There's actually an old John Oliver quote, I think, where he was saying something around Bitcoin is everything we don't understand about computers combined with everything we don't understand about money. DeFi is even worse, right? So I think we still have a lot of work to do, but those were some of the ingredients where I was like, there's a there. And like with any new thing, with new technology, new asset, we're going to see many bull and bear cycles. I think from an institutional perspective, I just, again, go back to voice of the customer. And our customers, retail customers and institutional customers and RIAs were asking about it. They were curious about it because their customers were asking them about it. So that actually kind of became also a thesis statement of, are we meeting the needs of the customers? And if Bitcoin has properties of something like digital gold and our clients are looking to these asset classes for diversity, are we meeting their needs, right? The last thing I'll just say to this is I was reminiscing about this with a colleague of mine from the industry, is it's fascinating to see how quickly we're seeing the flippening in career risk. And what I mean by that is, to your point, it was not long ago where leaders like me or others who worked at incumbents were talking to their board of directors or their C-suite about Bitcoin or digital assets. We were taking on significant career risk because you're like, what are you talking about? But today, if you are a decision maker or a leader or a policy maker, if you don't have an informed understanding of this asset class and an informed opinion about these things, now the career risk is on you. So it's fascinating how we've seen that flippening happen.
Yeah. That's super fascinating to me because I remember when I was going through the financial recruiting process, I remember hearing about the letter that Jamie Dimon issued, where he basically said, I was wrong. Crypto is the future, when before he'd been super bearish on it. And that's so fascinating. I think you hit the nail on the head that we're really starting to see that switch of, if you can't speak this language, it poses a career risk to you because you might be obsolete when this is becoming the next big thing. I am curious, though. We saw El Salvador adopt Bitcoin as legal tender, and there's been a lot of issues in that realm. In the U.S. alone, as we were talking about earlier, we've seen government agencies like the SEC move to block the development of certain crypto products recently with Coinbase. How have you worked to manage those dynamics working within the Fed, just given it's something that's still considered very high risk?
Yeah, my approach within the Fed actually isn't that different than the approach I took in industry, Simi. And what I mean by that is my approach has always been about education and not about evangelism. I want people to make the decision and come to the conclusion that they want to come to. But what I implore is you can no longer be apathetic about it. You can't just, this is going to go away. Kind of isn't going away. If anything, it's getting bigger and bigger. So what I tell people is apathy and inaction is no longer kosher. That's gone now, right? And it wasn't kosher before, but it's definitely not kosher now. So to me, it's like, how can I help put facts and data points in front of you, get you connected to credible, thoughtful people about the space, and then you come to the conclusion you want to come to. Frankly, I think debate is good. Again, we forget October 31st was the 13th birthday of the Bitcoin white paper, right? So in the Big Bang theory of all of this is just a teeny tiny portion, and we have a long game ahead of us. I know somebody who's kind of followed this ecosystem and worked in this ecosystem. I'm also the first one to admit it's not a panacea, and a good deal of pragmatism and prudence is necessary.
Absolutely.
So I think that approach, I find, makes those conversations more palatable, and people don't feel like they're getting talked down to or talked at or any of that stuff. So I've definitely found that approach to be productive. And there's definitely people who still are like, don't get it, don't understand it. I've had people dunk on me saying, you seem like a very smart, confident person, but then there's this Bitcoin thing that, you're obsessed with. So to each their own. So I think that pragmatism and education, even from a customer perspective, that was also the big thing in the private sector is we do want to level the playing field. We do want to widen access so that at the end of the day, every consumer is empowered to make the best decision for themselves. But in order to do that, we have to lead with education. So I think that approach I find, is often more fruitful. But it's a journey and it's fun.
Yeah. I really love that. The idea of education, not evangelism, because I think that's something that we're running into. And I think if we approach it as this is something that we need to learn together, there's more likely to be widespread adoption and welcoming of new concepts and new ideas like this. I want to spend a little bit of time of you getting to this role. You obviously spent a number of years at TD. Can you speak to some of the meaningful projects you worked on and how you feel it paved the path to you becoming CIO? And also, I'd love to hear a little bit about your time in banking as well and how that contributed.
One of the best pieces of advice I got early on in my career, Simi, and I don't think I fully appreciated it, but over the years, it's one of those pieces of advice that gets so much more worthwhile and you recognize the value of it the longer. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old, who knows? But I remember one of my bosses early on when I was starting in finance said, chase new experiences and new competencies. Everything else is a distraction. Titles, comps, this. No, don't get me wrong. We all want to be treated fairly and equitably and all of that. But his point to me was go after assignments where you can cultivate new experiences, you can learn new competency, you can do things that have never been done. And that over the years has just been this amazing compass for me because anytime I've had opportunities for different assignments, taking on the one that nobody else wants and always being in the startup mode has actually given me a seat at the front of everything new. And honestly, like I've been in roles like building new businesses in Asia or doing like amazing baller things. And I was like, I have no business doing this. I have a very strong imposter syndrome. I'm like, what am I doing? But the point is when you're in a lot of these traditional roles, there's like a pathway set for you. You do this and then you move this. And then if you're the person who's like, oh no, I'm totally going to go do this random thing and take on this career risk. But in my case, it served me well that, as AI and machine learning was coming up and people are like, well, everyone's talking about it. We don't know what to do with it. And then, for example, we looked at how we were engaging with our customers and was it the right way where the whole synchronous way of client has to call, like it was just so outmoded. So how can we take new technologies like AI and machine learning and completely disrupt client engagement by, again, putting the customer in the driver's seat and letting them take the lead on how they want to engage with you, when they want to engage with you in whatever modality and kind of going where the customer is versus making them come to you. And that led to partnerships with Apple and Google. And then working in Asia, building in that ecosystem was a whole another learning curve because consumers in Asia in many ways have leapfrogged what we're accustomed to here. I used to often joke when I used to come back from Asia back to stateside, I felt like I was regressing a little bit because, in Asia, everything is done on your WeChat app or your Alipay. Everything is on your phone. And I would come here, we'd go out for dinner, and then where everybody's handing their plastic cards, and then you get this flimsy piece of paper, this pen that never works, and you have to sign it. It's like, what's going on here, right? So kind of seeing how those systems and those countries like India and how they've leapfrogged with digital identity and digital payments and stuff like that was super informative in bringing that back here and kind of starting to execute it. So every deliverable, I've been delighted to, proud and grateful to be part of a team, and shipping it has always been about that metric of what barriers did we break down and what new constituents did we bring into the fold that otherwise would have been left looking in, right? How did we empower a whole new generation or a whole new constituency to take charge of their financial future, investing in their kids' education, investing in their retirement. Like, so to me, it's that notion of where every time we've been able to break down barriers, every time we've been able to empower somebody that otherwise wasn't empowered is really kind of what gives me the most joy. And I'll never forget this one email I got, Simi, is we were testing out what new voice modalities would do to experiences, right? This was in the early days of Siri or Alexa. I'm spelling her out because I don't know if she's in the room. Don't want to trigger her. But we kind of went into it, hey, let's test out what this new interface, this voice-driven interface can do at a time where everything is so visual and so tactile. And so we took some of our products and experiences and made it voice-driven, command-driven.
And where was this at? Where were you when you were doing this?
This was at TD Ameritrade. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So how do you get quotes? How do you find out what the markets are doing? How do you even do trade? Everything that's voice-driven. And so this was like a test for us. And we're like, let's figure it out. Let's learn, because it's a new interface. Let's figure out the UX and what it does.
Wow.
And I was in Seattle for some meetings, and we had a client meeting at one of our branches. And one of the managers there came up and said, hey, I have a client who wants to speak with you. I was like, okay, great. Always love to talk to clients. Usually they tell me what's not working. That's fine too. But in this case, this gentleman had visual impairments. And he's like, hey, I tested out the skill that you guys built, and I can't tell you what an impact it's made. I was like, really? Wow, tell me more. And the story he told me was, he walked me through his experience of what an hour for him looked like in the morning as he was trying to get caught up on what the markets had done overnight, or getting quotes for companies he was interested in or trading, or even kind of putting his trade tickets. And how much friction there was, because we were building with our contacts, and how a voice-driven interface completely was starting to break down those barriers and change and give it a more optimized, efficient experience, and an experience that was delightful to him, right? And I know that's one data point, but to amplify the point I made, it's again, those stories and those examples at the micro or macro level where you're like, wow, we have now been able to engage a group of consumers or constituents that otherwise didn't know how to,
couldn't participate.
Couldn't participate, didn't know how to participate, didn't know that there was actually something there for them to participate. Yeah. And by doing that, again, we're giving them that financial freedom, that financial security, that financial empowerment. To me, that's kind of been the undercurrent of every assignment, and frankly, also kind of coming into the Fed.
Wow. Just the passion you bring to all these topics and work that you're doing, I find it so amazing. It seems like you've had this tech-forward, future-forward mindset for a long time, but you've also alluded to the fact that it's been impacted by kind of what you saw growing up, hearing about your family stories as they went through partition. Finance, and particularly the world of crypto, tends to be extremely male-dominated, not very diverse. How has your South Asian heritage and your identity as a South Asian woman impacted you throughout your career, particularly being in rooms where you're probably the only person that looks like you?
That's an important question. And I think of my career in these multiple phases. And phase one was all finance, Wall Street, traditional finance, and then Silicon Valley investing technology world, and then crypto. Yes, you kind of sometimes look around and say, wow, I don't want to be a different person, but here I am. Now, I will also say I have been super, super fortunate, Simi, that I had so many amazing colleagues, mentors, advocates, sponsors, all the different names we can attach to them. And so many people who took a bet on me, who took a chance on me, that really didn't need to, but they saw something. Even when I was like, even like this role at the Fed, I was like, me? Are you sure? Like, I can recommend other people to you, which I tried to do to the Fed. I'm like, there's other people I can connect you with. So I'm always grateful for that. And even in any small way that I can, how am I paying it forward every day? How am I helping somebody else just like others have helped me and have continued to help me? What's that adage? You stand on the shoulders of the giants before you. So how can you perhaps be a shoulder that's lifting somebody up? I think for me, that immigrant ethos, frankly, has been very much an asset more than a liability, if I can put it that way, since we come from the world of finance. One of the things that my dad used to say all the time, and we would roll our eyes, and now I say it, so I don't know. He would always say, you're entitled to nothing, but you're grateful for everything. And what he was really trying to drill in was, you can't be complacent, you can't get entitled, you can't just expect things. You have to work for what you have, and you have to go after what it is that you want. And then every single day, you have to be grateful for what you have. And you have to ask yourself, am I fully capitalizing the good things that I already have on my plate? So even in those moments that you're like, right? It's like this reminder. And the other thing that I often think a lot about in these situations is, and I'm sure I saw it on Reddit, there's this mental life hack, which I totally use, is the power of when you take the phrase, I have to do this, and turn it into, I get to do this. It sounds so simplistic and it is so powerful.
Absolutely.
I mean, does it always work? There's still reasons I will find to kvetch about. But even on my toughest day, I think about this is nothing compared to the tough days my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents have had to endure. So I think those things are always like good anchors to remind you. And so I've made a conscious decision throughout my career that my differentiation needn't be a liability. It is an asset, but presenting it as an asset, sharing that perspective of, hey, I'm looking at it this way and it's different from maybe how you're thinking about the situation, but let me give you the context. And then let's think about, are there more customers who maybe are coming at it from our vantage point? And then let's have a debate. Let's come to a compromise. Just take that sense of agency versus the entitlement route. Sorry if that got preachy.
No, I think it's such a beautiful sentiment. And to be honest, I feel like it's something that's echoed a lot on Trailblazers is no matter how hard our hardest day is, we have so much to learn from the generation that preceded us because I'm also first generation American. Our parents uprooted their lives and moved here knowing absolutely nothing with no plan and unsure of how things would pan out. So I really appreciate you bringing that sentiment to the table. The last big question I have for you is, you've passed that first 180 days. What's your next big goal as CIO of the Federal Reserve?
So if I were to depart this role in a few years and I were to look back and kind of reflect, I think there's a couple markers that are important to me. One is, as I said, we have a very fertile ecosystem of decentralized innovation, giving it that sense of purpose, that rigor, but also the right infrastructure so that the talented people that we have across the Fed, agnostic of geography, hierarchy, what have you, are empowered to really innovate within their span of control, that they don't need permission. And I'm a big believer, Simi, that the best innovation comes out of talent that's closest to the end customer or to the end process. And that's why I often say, I'm just one node in this network. I am not the one that's going to come up with a brilliant idea. My job is to remove all the hurdles and really enable and empower every person within the Fed who has an idea, who sees a problem statement and just needs that muscle memory, that sponsorship to say, yes, go do it. We got your back, right? Help us build something better. So I think that's one. I think the second thing for me is around partnerships. So any big organization, this notion of we're special, we got to solve all our problems ourselves. We got to build everything from the ground up. And really calling FUD to that and saying, no, let's do the things we're uniquely qualified to. And then let's co-create and collaborate and create these force multipliers with partners in industry or academia. Because A, that gives you speed to market. And also, why are you building things that you have no business building? Focus on what you're good at. And that's a big part of what we're doing right now in terms of creating those on-ramps and making those industry partnerships and collaboration and working with academia simpler, faster, easier, but also then demonstrating the quick wins that come out of it, right? The best way to create compounding returns is not the rhetoric, it's the actual results, right? And then FOMO kicks in and everybody wants it.
Everyone wants to be a part of it, yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is around talent. And what I mean by that is, I worked in finance, I worked with policymakers, and yet it never crossed my mind that, one day I could work at the Fed or I could work in public service, right? And now I think back, I'm like, why was that never in my orbit? Like, why did I never think about it? And so that's another thing. Like, how do we create something like Fed Corps, like Peace Corps, but for Federal Reserve, and really bring in some of the smartest engineers, designers, product owners, and give them the ability of building something, solving something, creating something for their country. And that really excites me because this is a meaningful work. You get to make a dent at a level that's just unfathomable. And I know, and I'm sure you know, there's a lot of our colleagues who also has shared that sense of mission about giving back. And I know this is going to sound cheesy, but one of the biggest drivers for me about taking this role was I'm an immigrant to this country. This country has been amazing to me and my family. I don't have a lot of talents and skills that I can serve this country in other ways. And I felt like, okay, given my talents, maybe this is a small way for me to give back to the country that's been amazing to me. So how do we create more of that? Because I'm sure there's other people who have skills, who have talents, who want to make that dent, but just don't even know about it. So those are three things that I obsess about quite a bit.
Yeah. I love that. And I really love the last one because it really, I think, underscores this sense of service that I do think a lot of South Asians have, just being so grateful to have had the opportunity to grow up here and pursue careers here and build lives here. But, when we think of service in the traditional sense, it's like Peace Corps or military service, not being able to use these practical skills that we might be building in more traditional careers. So I love that. And sign me up.
Be ready. I'm going to have a recruiter call you. And I mean that for your audience. If anybody's interested in learning more, it gives me so much delight to share the story. And if we can help open more doors for other people, and in both ways, right? I think the more cross-pollination we have.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, we wear one team jersey and it's USA. So the more we work together, the more we learn from each other, the more we understand each other's worlds and perspectives. I think we will continue to be one of the most innovative jurisdictions and countries, which is what we all want.
Yeah. I think right there, you just captured the entire ethos of this podcast. So thank you, Sunayna, for such a wonderful conversation. I feel just so energized and fired up after talking to you. So it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you want to get new episodes straight to your inbox, subscribe to our newsletter at southasiantrailblazers.com and follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.